Today we're talking about all of this. It's been about a year since I came up with the idea to sit down and regularly record and release videos talking about things that I like or were memorable to me for one reason or another. And during that time, I've written down every idea that's come into my head that I thought could make a video. Then I made a list of ones that weren't going to make a video. They just don't really have a whole lot to them, but it's worth mentioning. Especially some of the ones that have been appearing in videos and backgrounds or something like that, but have never really gotten a story. It's kind of because there isn't a whole lot to tell. For example, I have a lot of Star Wars Black Series figures. They were a whole lot of fun to collect. I've got them there. I have them down at the bottom that you can't see in this angle. I even have some behind me. But there's not really a story there. I had some money. They were releasing. It was cool. We were into Star Wars. This was kind of around that they rebooted. They got new movies coming out. They've got all the figures. Went out and did my best to find as many. Went to Walmart's, Target's, Toys R Us. Any place that could, CVS, Walgreens, they were stocked all over the places. You had a chance to find them. And typically you'd see the same ones over and over. But wound up hunting down some that were really fun. And I enjoyed it. But is that enough of a story? Not really. Very similarly, I have a ton of Funko Pops. You can see here, after the move, I never actually got back to organizing them, but they're finally displayed for the first time in years. I had them displayed before I left Georgia originally, but never really had the time or place or energy to set them up, but mostly the space. Now we finally have a place where we can display them, and not all of these are mine. There are also some are my significant others, but we haven't gotten around to organizing them yet. Is there really a story there? No. Very similarly, went to a lot of places. I can tell you I had a friend, a roommate at the time, and the two of us would go out looking. That was a regular weekly activity. It would be like, what are you up to tonight? No, not much. Let's go see what we can find. And go looking. I was buying tons of Funko Pops. He was looking for other things. There was a time where we went into a Hot Topic because they had all kinds of exclusives. And we'd gone there once or twice, and the lady there thought that we were a couple. And we laughed about that and then started calling each other couple names. And made a whole thing about it. That was funny. Is that really a story? No. I got a couple chases. He actually found the first one. We went to a Barnes & Noble. This has been months and months of searching and looking everywhere and finding all the ones that were interesting. And he walked up and was like, oh, there's a chase. Well, I don't care about this. Do you want it? And I went, it's a Buffy. It's Spike from Buffy, but it is a chase that we found out in the wild. So yes. Is that really a story? No, not really. And so I've got a bunch of things like that. Things that even appear in these videos that if there isn't really that much to talk about, I know it's not going to make for an exciting video. So not really worth mentioning. Another story that I was recently reminded of that I wrote down and I knew that it wouldn't be a full video talk about is the video game World of Warcraft. I didn't really play a whole lot of it growing up. It was around. I knew about it. And then I met a girl who played it at a theater summer camp. She was really into it, and she wanted me to play it. I was like, okay, that's really cool. She bought me a copy. I didn't have any money. I was a teenager, broke, and didn't have a job or anything, and no way to get it. My dad wasn't going to buy it for me. So she sent me a copy, and I couldn't play it. It was a monthly expense. I'd played MMOs on my computer. We've talked about several of them, and I couldn't afford to pay for a monthly expense. I didn't have a credit card or anything, so she sent me a copy of the game. I figured out about when this was for a timeline. It was the 2005 summer and fall timeline. I was 14 at the time. So she sent me a copy of the base game. That was all that was out. This was before an expansion had even come out. And a 60-day trial card, and I was really excited to play it, and I couldn't. My computer would not run the game, and neither of us had considered that or anything, and I just felt really bad. This was the computer that was handed down to me from my older sibling, and so I went, well, okay, I can't play it. I thought that was where that story ended, and then I remembered that I actually really wanted to play it, and I felt bad, so I convinced my dad to buy for me a graphics card, and I went to install the graphics card. I did do some research, but clearly not very much at all. I tried to install the graphics card. This is how old this was. I couldn't because I did not have a PCIe slot. I only had a PCI slot for graphics cards. So I was trying to upgrade a graphics card when I was 14 and did not know about PCIe. That's how old we're talking about here. The story doesn't quite end there. I eventually would get to play World of Warcraft later on. By the time that I was able to play it and I got a computer, I think I was around 16 when my dad bought me an HP gaming computer, and I was able to play at that point. Wish I still had that thing. It wouldn't do anything, but I just wish I knew the stats of it at this point. The specs. I wish I knew what components it had in the computer, but I don't know. I do know that it would run World of Warcraft, and I wound up playing through the 60-day trial card that I had that was a few years old at this point, and then playing the free version. It wasn't really a free version, but they did let you play a trial that would cap you at like level 20, and you couldn't trade with other people, and you couldn't have a certain amount of gold, but I did play through that. I remember having a good bit of time then, and then again playing sometime later on, much down the road, but before I became an adult, where they had, we had seen the South Park episode. The South Park episode, Make Love, Not Warcraft, was just immediately, it felt like the game, and I went, oh yeah, well, I want to play this. And that's when I played it with some of my siblings. That was a ton of fun. I remember doing that. And then the only other instance where I've ever really tried World of Warcraft was after I became an adult, and I was playing private servers, because I'd gotten into playing private servers for both RuneScape and MapleStory, so we could just skip straight to the end and be the max level without having to grind for literal years to get to that point. And in World of Warcraft, what I remember the most about any of this that was just so much fun, and I still go back to want to do that to this day, is that the warrior, I don't remember the classes, but one of the ones who would use melee weapons, when you were the max level, you could have a skill. If you went down the skill tree, you would have a skill that would let you equip a two-handed sword in each hand. So this big, huge, hulking two-handed sword, and you would have two of them on your back and then use that for combat. And I just remember playing that on the private server and going, this is like the top that any video game has ever been. And ever since then, I've wanted to do that. And I've gotten, Dark Souls has been the closest to come to the point where I could equip two gigantic swords, one in each hand. It's just so much fun. But yeah, unfortunately, I no longer have the game box that it came with for back in the day. I had that for a long time, but that's gone. So unfortunately, I no longer have the physical item. That story was the entire experience of me playing World of Warcraft, and it's just not enough to fill a video. It was a fun time. It was a good memory. I'm glad I remembered it, and now I've recorded it, so I'll be able to remember it later on down in my life, but it's just not a full video. And I've had plenty of ideas for other ones that, like, I wish I had the items to go along with it, so it was a little bit more interesting than just me talking. I looked up and put research into the cameras that we owned growing up, the video cameras specifically, Sony Handycams and JVS recorders that would record to mini VHS tapes. That's a cool thing. I would like to try to get, I will never find the originals that we had. Those are long since trashed and gone, but it would be nice to have a version of that somehow. We do actually have a Sony Handycam right here that we got at some point, and I started making videos with my younger siblings using that camera. The cameras was a big part of why I started recording this, because I thought, if I do this and I really get into it, maybe I can start setting aside a bit of money and purchase an old vintage camera. And then, just like I did right at the beginning, learn about it. That one right there. And look up the history and appreciate it in that way. And then it just joins the background as part of the set. And a year later, I've not really bought any cameras. But I'm not done with that. I just know it's going to be a matter of time. My money has been going elsewhere. And that kind of brings me to another thing about this video series. It has been a ton of fun, and it has given me opportunities over the last year that I probably would not have had. It was something that was itching at me that I wanted to do. I wanted to try and record something different from going out and seeing the nature side of everything that I do on the other half of this channel, basically. And I wanted to talk about this stuff while I still have it. Who knows how long I'm going to be able to hold on to these things, but what I've been able to do in a year is build a set and actually have a backdrop and have those things and go get clothes for this and learn how to tie a tie. That was something I thought about while I was getting ready to record this, and I went, oh, let me grab a shirt and a tie real quick. I don't have a reason to dress up anymore at all. I don't have a job that requires me to go anywhere but here, and I don't have to appear fancy on camera or anything. I used to. The first job I got out of high school, which, because I was homeschooled, just means that I moved out of the house, required me to wear a button-up. And sometimes I would wear a tie to fancy it up a little bit. And we were expected to have a business casual dress wear. And I remember one of my friends calling me out on it at one point where I wore a tie, and then I either wore the same tie or I wore another one. he was like, oh, is that the only knot you know how to tie? And I just went, yeah. And did not tell him the truth at the time, which was that I did not know how to tie a tie at all. I had tried, and my dad tried to teach me, but we didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to go out and to wear one in any situation. And I'd looked up and I'd tried to learn at different times, and it was always very confusing. I could never get it. And so I would just have someone else who knew how to tie one, tie it for me, and just be like, yeah, I'm not good with it right now. I can't remember or something, you know, and we're in a hurry. We got to get this done. Can you just help me out with this? And then when I'd go to take it off, leave it tied and just hang it up in the closet tied forever. I now know how to, it's basic. It's a simple knot, but I can do it from memory without having to look up a guide now. I was able to do this without actually going and looking, and it functions. It works. There's a lot more fancy things that I could do with it, and maybe I will over time. But that was another thing that I've learned over the last year and that I've been able to do is I went out and bought like shirts and ties because I'm regularly sitting down and recording, and it gives me an excuse to be fancier than I usually am. And it's a good, nice thing. And actually, this tie and this shirt have a little story. Right after we moved, I had a little bit of money left over, and I knew that I was building all of this, and I was setting it up. And I went, well, I'm gonna sit down. I want to get shirts and vests and ties and presentable and look fancy. And we went to the thrift store because that's of course where I'm gonna try to get everything, to get it as cheaply as possible. And I'm digging through, getting a bunch of ties. I think I bought like 8 of them and shirts. And I even saw one of the employees walking past. This is at a Goodwill, and he's wearing a suit. I see him, I'm like, that's a nice dressed man, because he's got a shirt and a tie on and everything. And I notice it and I go, all right, cool. And that's actually the guy who winds up like checking out when we get up to the front. And he's like, you rated all of our ties. He goes, I go over there and, you know, pick out, you got some good ones. And we're, you know, having a little back and forth there because they started mandating, making them wear like business professional, you know, having to wear the ties. So he's been doing that. And he's just suddenly instantly more knowledgeable. He started talking about the different knots you can get and ties where the different parts of the ties are differently colored. So you use a specific knot so that this part is one color and the rest of it is a different. I go, well, that sounds amazing. I got to learn more about that. I don't know anything about this. As a matter of fact, as we're picking out the shirts, I'm just trying to find something that fits. That's all I've ever looked for. I buy a lot of clothes from thrift stores, and that's all I've ever looked for is, does it fit well enough? And specifically, as we're digging through the racks, my significant other Bonnie's there, and she sees the brand. She's like, you got to get that one. That's a really nice shirt. That's an expensive brand. And I go, yeah, okay, whatever. And so then as a little anecdote while we're checking out and the cashier up there, I remember I was mentioning, I was like, I know nothing about this. She even like pointed out one of the fancier brands and said, if that fits, you really got to get it, you know, because it's a nice shirt. And the guy's looking through and he pulls out, oh, and Eddie Bauer, yeah, this is it. And like they both start cracking up because the two of them both know that kind of stuff. And I am completely clueless. I just go, yeah, it's a blue shirt. It's nice. It's this one that I'm wearing right now. I specifically put it on for this video to do this. That's been a fun little time that I've had specifically going out of my way. I would not have been buying shirts or ties without having this opportunity to sit down and record regularly. And that brings me to my main point. For almost a year now, I've been recording and releasing a batch record and then release a video every single week, except for one time where I skipped 1 week, and that was because we were moving and it was just going to be too much to try to get everything done. I thought I would be set up in this location much faster. And I'm just going to pull back a little bit because it's gotten to the point where now it's almost a hassle. It's not fully like a chore that I have to sit down and do this, but I do hit that point where I am now trying to do several other things. And since starting this, I'm also releasing 2 other regular series. One where I play Pokemon every week to try to complete as close as I can get to a complete Pokedex with all of the variations and exclusives and things like that. And then the other one where I do sit down and play Red Dead Redemption 2, but in the style of almost like a Bob Ross kind of situation where it's a very soft-spoken, and it's my version of when I can go outside and see wildlife in a perfect environment where I always will go see wildlife or nature and be able to capture photography in the game. Those are both regular weekly things that I'm still going. This one's just going to change from every single week to maybe every other week or every couple weeks. It's basically whenever. I'm not stopping it by any means. I built all of this. I fully intend to continue recording and releasing videos, but instead of every single week, I'm going to pull it back to the point where when I have something really good to talk about, then I'll make a video about it. And I'm not going to stress about, I got to sit down and I got to batch record all of these, because if I don't have enough, and now I've got a schedule and a release schedule and I have to stay on top of that with 2 other series that I'm doing, and I want to go out and see wildlife as often as I can to try to further my progress there. It's just a bit much. It's not too much. I could keep it up, but I don't want to burn myself out. And I feel like I'm approaching that point where I just need to ease up on that gas a bit. So it's not going to be a regular thing going forward anymore, but I'll never really stop it. I've got plenty more ideas. I've got a list of notes here with things that I can talk about. It's just going to take time to do some proper research on them, come up with something, and maybe if I pull back a bit, I can spend a little bit of money on getting some vintage cameras to talk about, some really cool stuff, and be able to learn and go through that. And I started really thinking about this within probably the last 2 months or so, since I was getting close to that point, and I really wanted to hit a year, and we're real close to it. I think technically this is like the 51st video that I've made, or maybe the 50th video. And if it was an every week thing, it would be real close to 52, wouldn't it? But we're there, where it's more than 50, I'm pretty sure. It's close enough. I've got to call it here and just kind of ease up and record whenever I want to. But really, that's it. I've had so much fun doing this, and I know I'll be continuing doing it in the future, just not quite as often as I have. I think the best thing I can say now is recording these videos, this series, Capitalism Ho, is something that I like.